Brian, what's going on, man? Long time no see.
I know. I'm happy that you sent me this note last night, though, so we could coordinate our shirts because this was a beautiful way to start the day.
Yeah, for those of you guys who are watching us on YouTube, me and Brian are twinning just a little bit today. So it's good to see you again, though, man. Really good to
You
see you.
too, brother. It's been a minute.
It has actually. The first time we met was August 2020. I'm sorry, April 2021. Can you believe it's been that long? A year and a half.
I can only believe it's been that long because that was the beginning or in the middle of a 526-day journey that was really profound in my life. And so, yeah, it's been insane that those last 17, 18 months have flown by. But man, it's been really fun watching you from afar as we've been getting to know each other and all the impact you're having.
Well, thank you very much. Well, tell me about this 526-day journey.
Yeah, I just did a long post on it the other day. I'm big into dates and patterns. And for whatever reason, I've always been able to kind of look ahead and see dates. And for whatever reason, they become significant. So it's either because I manifest it or it's just because of something I'm attaching to. But March 6th of 2020 or 2021 was a day that I thought about every day for the prior 8 years. It was the day that my son was going to be the exact same age I was the day of the accident that changed my life forever. And leading all the way up until August 15th of this year, which was the same age my daughter was, or was going to be the same age I was during the date of the accident. And in between there, we had the 29th and the 30th anniversary of the accident. We unpacked significant elements of anger within me, ultimately to go through a path of almost losing everything I ever cared about with my wife and my kids, having to rebuild, reframe, reconnect, and break generational patterns in our household so that I could show up as the best version of me, because that's the only thing binary in my world is my wife and kids aren't good. I walk away from everything I'm doing. So this 526 days was layered in with a whole bunch of things. I met the woman who saved my life for the first time on the 30th anniversary of the accident just 2 weeks ago. And so many other little things that took place and really were just transformational in my life and the life of our family. But my kids, that's what's beautiful about it, is that the 526 days was wedged between the dates that related to both of them. And it's just really ironic how everything in my world goes through the lens of family at this point.
Wow. We got a lot to talk about. So
We do, bro.
let's start with the accident. I obviously know about this because I heard you speak at an event, but I want you to share it.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask everybody who's listening right now, unless you're driving, to just close your eyes for 1 second. I'm going to take you on a little journey. If you're driving, keep your eyes open, please, and you'll understand even more why I care about that in a second. I want you to imagine going to a store, having a successful shopping trip, coming out of the checkout line, walking out the door, you've got a pep in your step, you're going on with your day. You look up and you feel the wind blowing through your hair and you feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. As you're getting to your car, you're reaching into your pocket to grab your keys to unlock your door. And all of a sudden you turn your head left and you see a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. Anybody who's known me for more than 2 minutes and probably can already tell already, I talk fast, I walk fast, I've got a lot of energy. So I was the first one in the car. I was waiting for my mom, because this was back in the days before key fobs, to literally reach into her purse, grab the keys, get to the door, turn the key so that we go on with our way. And as all that was happening, with her only 3 or 4 feet behind me, a truck pulled up in front of the store. Driver and middle passenger got out, and the passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, brother. Scooted over, put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting across the parking lot 40 miles an hour right at us with no time to react. It hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. August 10th, 1992, 115-degree day. I'm now laying on the pavement. My mom and brother look up, and my brother says, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there, 10 feet away in the parking lot." Now, I always have to honor this woman. I said it quickly in my last bit, but I've always said I'm forever indebted to the woman that was there that day, my guardian angel, because there was a nurse that walked out of the store and saw the literal life and limb scenario, and she chose to go into action instead of go on with her day. What makes that even more powerful is just 2 weeks ago when I spoke to her for the first time, she told me that she had a friend that was with her who was also a nurse who turned her head and went on with her way. So she came literally into action despite the fact that there were 2 nurses there. She's the one that chose to come over. She stopped the bleeding on my main wound and saved my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my detached limb on ice within minutes to give me a fighting chance of having that. So Larry, if it wasn't for this woman, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. And I realized that a lot of people probably weren't expecting it to go there today. Yes, I've got a really unique story, but what I've also learned in all this time of doing this is every single one of us has a unique story. So what's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from our stories so that we become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning.
Wow, man. So a lot has actually happened since the last time I saw you speak. Like this whole journey of 526 days, you now have met the woman that saved your life. I'm curious, what was the interaction like with the woman who saved your life?
Magical.
Yeah. So tell us about
brief. Yeah, it was brief. I've been searching for her for 10 years. And my mom found her the Monday before the anniversary. So August 10th, this last year, was the 30th anniversary. My mom found her literally 2 days before and surprised me on the day. So I had already had things in motion for the day. And I really wanted to honor a lot of the things that I'd already created. So I had about a 15-minute window to talk with her. It was magical. She's thought about me pretty much every day for 30 years, similar to how I think about her very, very frequently. What's interesting is for her, I asked her, why did she choose to go into action? And she said it was never a thought. Mm-hmm. It was instinct. And she said, even though my friend turned away, she said, all of my training kicked in and there was nothing else I was going to do but then to go into action. And then I came to find out all the things that were happening in her life at the time. And the trauma that she experienced as a result of being there, putting herself into that situation to save me, and the ripple effect that had on her life over the following 3 to 5 years, ultimately led her to leave Arizona. What's interesting, though, is she also said, and I want to be really clear here before I even say this, because this is not about me, but she said to me, she said, Brian, I also have to credit you for the last 25 years of my career. And I paused and I took a step back and I said, what are you talking about? She said, when I left Arizona, I moved out to Atlanta, and Atlanta Children's was an organization that I had always been admiring and an organization that I was hopeful to work for. She said, I got in, and in my second question, they asked me about a situation. I didn't get more than 3 sentences in about what took place to you. They hired me on the spot, and I had that job for 25 years. Now, what I said to her is, I said, now, here's the thing. You wouldn't have kept that job if it wasn't for the heart that you have and how you led and how you came in and cared for all these kids and families for 25 years. But at least what's interesting and cool for me is that she felt so much centeredness, so much connectedness to the story and the experience that it also fueled a lot of her care for the following 25 years with other people. Now she's retired and working at the second largest Air Force base in the country as a museum. And so she's just a really fascinating woman. We're going to be reconnecting here in about a week or two to take it deeper, because all I had the capacity to do was to process that 10 or 15 minutes just because of everything else that was going on. And so I really want to honor the space and the connection with her because it was truly magical. And it was like I found someone from my past that I didn't even know I was missing, even though I was searching for her, because she truly is the reason I'm here. Outside of my parents, who are obviously significant reasons I'm here, I literally wouldn't be alive if it was not for her choice in that moment.
Wow. That is quite a story, my friend. I want to go back to the day. You 8 years old, correct?
I was 7. Yeah.
7. 7 years old, your mom, and you had siblings there at the time as well?
My brother, who was 14 months older than me. Yep. So he was 8 at the time.
So tell me what was going on for you as this whole situation unfolded as a child, like how you actually remember seeing this through the eyes of a 7-year-old child. Mm-hmm. And then what I would love for you to share is, what was your mom going through? And then maybe the aftermath of all of that and how the family just dealt with everything that had happened.
As you can imagine, there's lots of layers to this, so I'll try to keep it as succinct as I can. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't remember anything. In fact, I don't remember many things for 5, 6, 7 years after the accident. My brain and our brains are so powerful that through post-traumatic stress, I literally not only blocked out major parts of my life, but it actually rewrote my memories from before my accident. So when I watch home videos now, of me prior to age 7, it doesn't seem like it's me because my memories don't remember both arms the same ever. And so that's like what's really powerful. So I don't remember that day. My mom is an incredible human being. Her strength, her will, her ability to manage through chaos has got to be one of the highest levels I've witnessed in any human being ever. And it's not just in my situation. I've seen her in so many others. But she had to deal with her son, who's on the ground in 2 parts, and her other son, who witnessed all of it simultaneously and have to manage through the chaos in that moment. The first ambulance that got called got into a car accident that day, right? This was back before there was cell phones. So she couldn't call anybody. She couldn't get in touch with anybody. My dad, we just were talking about it when we were reminiscing the other day. My dad got a call at work from someone at the first hospital that I went to, where they just repaired my internal bleeding and basically secured the stability of my life before they even contemplated the reattachment. My dad had to go to 2 different hospitals because he was given the wrong information, didn't know where to go. It took him 6 hours to find us because of how it was really being positioned. So I'm thinking about my dad too. Like he didn't know who was hurt. Nobody gave him any details. He just knew that his family was in a major injury and he needed to get to a hospital. That's all he knew. Right. My mom held it together until I was in the operating room, and I think the second hospital, and until her dad got there, my grandpa. And when he got there, she had a minute to fall apart. He got there before my dad did. And then he took my brother so that my mom could have some space while they needed to do it. The aftermath, brother, was significant. I'll tell you, one of the most significant lessons I learned, though, came from that first experience in the hospital. Because I remember laying in the bed at 7 and feeling sorry for myself and asking myself questions like, why? Why me? What is my life going to look like? What am I going to be able to do? And a lot of people are like, wait, you were doing that at 7? Yeah, I was. Your sense of self is real. After the 2 days of believing I was in a dream, once it settled in, still didn't seem real. But that got knocked out really quickly because we were in the ICU and we had families coming up to us saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. We're so sorry for what happened to you. Oh my gosh, this is so traumatic. What can we do to help? And then come to find out that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another 30 days. Perspective hit me right between the eyeballs, because though at that moment I didn't know whether or not my arm would successfully be reattached, I knew that I'd have my life. The immediate threat to my life was gone. And so perspective pointed me at what was important. And one of the more profound lessons that came from it was that I learned early not to get stuck by the things that had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And again, what I've realized in all this time is that moved people move people. And so I've just now started to really understand how to use my story, my experiences, my lessons, my healing of pain, my shedding of layers, my processing of emotions that took 25 years to reconnect to now enable and empower other people to start to create that joy, freedom, and fulfillment in their own lives. But I'll tell you that there was a deep level of impact in so many other ways beyond that first 2 weeks. And so I'm sure we'll unpack pieces of that, but that's really what the initial 2 weeks was. It was just chaos, trying to get our arms around everything. My brother spent a week away from our family with friends and grandparents because both my parents were in the hospital. My mom didn't go home for 2 weeks, right? And so she literally lived in the hospital with me for 2 weeks. And look, I always say this, like, yes, my story is unique and extreme. There are so many others that are more unique and extreme. But again, the reality of it is that this had a ripple effect for the last 30 years in so many ways, of which we're still discovering, frankly.
Wow. You mentioned early on that your mom is one of the most resilient human beings in the face of chaos. Mm-hmm. What did she display specifically? And maybe even over the years, as you look back on your childhood, what are some memories that come up of your mom always being calm in the pocket?
Well, that day, I'm not sure that she shed a single tear until her dad got there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because she's not emotional. It wasn't because she didn't feel. It's because she knew what she had to take care of, and that her primary job was to make sure that both my brother and I were protected and safe. And that was her number one job in that moment. So she literally, in the midst of chaos, after watching my arm be torn from my body in front of her, knowing the impact that was going to have on my brother, was able to still maintain calm and focus to get through what needed to be done until there was another adult that she knew, liked, and trusted that she could actually surrender in that moment. Years went by without my full appreciation for understanding some of those deep lessons that they taught me. you've heard me talk about one of the more profound ones, but my mom was really one of the ones that helped me ingrain this in my life. We look back at home videos now, and I have all this footage where I came home without skin on my arm, and I didn't have skin on my arm for a while, right? Because they needed the swelling to go down before they could start doing skin grafts and start pulling the skin off. So I literally had a shoulder that was about the size of my full-grown man shoulder now as a 7-year-old, completely swollen. And you can see, and we had neighbors telling us throughout the neighborhood that they could hear my screams 5 doors down because of the pain that I was in physically. And she would have to maintain through that, not only volume, but obviously the depth of pain in her son's voice to be able to focus on doing the dressing changes, making sure that she was there to help me be strong in those moments. And then years later, I find out that there were times that they would make me do something that they knew I would need to learn how to do, like tying my shoes, learning how to button my pants with one hand before I had use of my left hand again. Simple day-to-day things that would have taken them 2 seconds to do for me, but they realized the importance of helping me learn. And so they would be tough in those moments. And then my mom would go around the corner and cry. I didn't find out about that till I was an adult. How many times that she would, in those moments, be strong so that I could borrow her strength until she had the space to fall apart. And so we can look at so many examples of this. This is just a few. But the reality of it is like I was in a fog in those years following, right? I truly was, because I was being guided through the process. But my parents were not. They were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of therapy. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they willed themselves day in and day out to embrace the pains required to ultimately strengthen and heal me. And that was one of the other profound lessons that I learned through this period of time following the next 10, 15 years, but I didn't understand and embrace this for probably 15 or 20 years later, but it was to embrace pain, to avoid suffering. And I believe that's also where we gain freedom. And so they modeled by example, truly how to navigate. What does resilience look like? What do empathy and compassion look like? And in the midst of everything that was happening to us, they would still show up for others, not just my brother. And so there's a lot of things that I really took from this experience. Just watching the strength and resilience of both my parents, truly. My mom, though, was the one that had to deal with probably the most amount of trauma because she was there on the scene.
Wow. And tell us about your dad and his experience with this, and even the aftermath of your interactions with him, whether it be days, weeks, months, years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad did everything he possibly could. Right. But it also was one of those times. And I say this really, really cautiously because I want to make sure that this is received appropriately. My dad didn't have the same set of tools that my mom did to deal with some of the difficult moments. And so he also really owned the role of the provider for at least those first 5 to 7 years after the fact. And I now know that they actually had very intentional discussions around the roles that they would need to play, the communication they would need to have, because these types of situations typically tear families apart. And my parents decided they were going to be better in this together. They would be able to actually give me and my brother the greatest amount of support through the healing that we needed. And so my dad was there. He was very present. He was very much a part of dressing changes at the hospital. But my mom in those first few years was really the primary caregiver. What's interesting, though, is my dad, I don't know, maybe 5 or 7 years after that, and he kept a job that he didn't want simply to make sure that I had the insurance that I needed at the time. Because again, the world was a lot different back then. And so he kept a job longer than he wanted to. But when that window created, my dad actually laid himself off. He was in a position to be able to do that. And he took 2 years to be a stay-at-home dad, legitimately. And I never would have seen that coming because my dad he's not the caregiver, right? He's a strength. He's someone to lean on. And he and I operate very similarly. We view the world the same. We think the same. We operate the same. But my dad went into the position where we would come home and our snacks would be on the counter. He'd make sure we got our homework done, right? He'd come outside and play with us on the basketball court out front or whatever we needed to do. And so he ended up having a slightly different role. But it was a little bit more delayed as it related to my development and how it impacted with the accident. At that time, I was not in a day-to-day care needing recovery. I was operating as a 12-year-old kid, right? And so I was playing and I was doing stuff. So it was a slightly different transition for him. What I know, though, is how difficult it was for him in so many ways. I've not had this conversation with him, but I often imagine that in that position, not being the parent on site, it would be easy also to point blame to your partner. And I think there might have been one time that it was slightly hinted that that was the case, and it was shut down pretty quickly by my mom, and then they moved through it. But the reality of it is like when he's got 6 hours operating in chaos, driving to multiple different hospitals, no ability to get in touch with anybody, no ability to communicate, like I can only imagine as a father now how I would be experiencing that just absolute panic and fear for 6 hours. And what does that do in your body? And what's the ripple effect of that? And so we've done a lot of generational healing in these last 5 years because I didn't know a whole lot until I had the opportunity to. You see, when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I also shut off emotional pain. And I didn't even know that for 25 years, right? I never went to therapy. I never processed these things as a kid because so many people around me, including some of the specialists and professionals, said that they thought I was fine because of how I was managing it. But really, I just shoved a lot of stuff down and really shut it off, not understanding the depth of the pain that I needed to heal because my body healed relatively quickly and easily. It's the other elements that took years for all of us to recover from. And then, frankly, we're still having conversations around it to reconnect as a family at a deeper level, because this was something that not only bonded us, but also created separation for us. I mean, my brother and I were best friends at the time. All of a sudden he lost his playmate, right? So that had an impact on our relationship for years, and his fear and his worry and what he had to process through his trauma. It wasn't just my accident, right? This was the accident that impacted our whole family.
Wow. What was it like growing up for you then after that? So as far as like, let's move into maybe the teenage years, let's double your age, go to 14, 15, 16 years old where, kids are a little bit, they're not a little bit, they're very aware of what's going on. Right. I think of, my 8-year-old who is right around the same age as you, who he's recently been diagnosed with tics. And the kids in his class are starting to notice, and they're starting to make comments and very hurtful things, right? Kids don't have a filter when it comes to some of those things. So what did the next, 4, 5, 6, 7 years look like for you?
Well, it was more than just the kids. It was really everyone, because my story is so unique. I got so used to seeing jaws hit the ground and just like shock and awe, because they'd see a kid with a broken arm or somebody that was rehabbing or had a splint on at different periods in that time. And they'd look at me and ask what happened. I'd tell them, and they wouldn't believe it. They'd immediately look to my parents for validation. They didn't believe my own story. So that created a little bit of armor for me to protect the fact that the world didn't see me and understand me, and they didn't believe my own story. I also got really tired of being viewed through a lens of what other people thought they'd be capable of in my situation. So how often they would layer limitations into my world around what I could or couldn't do because of my accident, my arm, my injury. But the reality of it is like, I hated that. And so that also created a mental narrative for me that I was going to show what was possible. And then between 7 and really 16, 15 to 16, yeah, I got bullied a lot. I had a lot of friends, but I got bullied a lot because I was different, right? I stood out, anybody that's different. And so though I still was able to play sports with lots of kids after about 3rd or 4th grade, a couple of years after the accident, I was always an outlier and always got stood out. Plus, I've always had a big personality and a loud voice. So you pair those two things together, and it just created a ripple effect of people not knowing how to deal with me and what to do in and around me. And so, I had some very, very good friends that got me through those periods of time, but it also taught me a lot about relationships. And what I didn't realize was the real impact that had on me in human connection, because I created a mental narrative in those following 13 years after the accident that was Brian's good, Brian's strong, I'm capable, I can do anything myself, and I don't need anybody's help. It was a protection mechanism that I didn't realize until far later, and it served me very well. I crushed expectations, blew people's minds on things that I did. And I don't say that to brag or impress. It's just the truth. But that narrative ultimately bit me too, because that layer of protection also had me so disconnected from myself, disconnected from others, and disconnected from my emotion, which would help me regulate and see the world more authentically, that there was other periods of my life I had to unwind those aspects.
When did it become obvious that you had to unpack some of those things? And while it sounds like it served you extremely well, right? In some aspects. What was the aha moment where you were like, wait a second, this might not be exactly the direction I want to keep going in?
So there were a few, and there was different layers that went into it. So I'll just hit them at the highest level, and then we can decide if we want to go into anyone further. When I was 20, I got into a snowboarding accident, and I re-broke my left arm and almost lost it again. I went 10 months with it hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of the medical malpractice. But it was a compound fracture. The bone came out, so they didn't do surgery. They didn't clean it up. They didn't treat it as well as it was. And it was in that 10-month period where I got extremely depressed, extremely disconnected, that I realized the power of our narratives. Because in the time that I was arguably the most vulnerable I've been in my adult life, nobody was there. And oh, by the way, I don't say that with any passive aggressiveness. I'm not upset. I'm not resentful. I'm not anything. Because I had lots of people in my life. I had lots of friends. I had lots of family. But they believed in my narrative. They believed Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable. He can do anything. And if he needs help, he'll ask for it. That was their belief. But I didn't have the courage at the time to put myself into a vulnerable position enough to ask for help. And so that's when I shifted to realize that I really needed to double down on human connection. Because though I had lots of people in and around me, I wasn't deeply connected because I wasn't being vulnerable and authentic in so many moments because of the armor I was still carrying. And so I shifted into that next period of time, and I focused very specifically on vulnerability and authenticity, which I believe are the glue that binds human connection. It served me very well. But I realized far later, another 13 years, in fact, that I was doing that strategically and tactically. And what I mean by that is one of my other aha moments was in my early 30s, laying on the couch with my daughter after playing with her for a little while. She puts her arm around my neck. She gives me a kiss on the cheek. She's maybe 18 months old at the time. She says, "I love you, Dada." And I broke down in tears. It was the first time I remembered in that moment in my life crying out of joy. I don't typically cry. I wish I could. I just did a post on that the other day on IG, like legitimately, like I wish I could cry because it's a beautiful release of emotion. And I don't think that it's weak for men to cry. I think it's one of the greatest signs of strength. But the reality of it is when I realized that I'm crying because of pure joy, and I've not experienced it this way before, what else am I missing on the spectrum of emotions? That's when I started to realize that when I shut this off, I also shut off emotional pain. And guess what? Human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. So I did it strategically and tactically, but it lacked the depth. And it was in that period of time that I started to recognize the layers of shame that I was operating under. And it was a few years after that that we unpacked my anger. It was in 2021. But the reality of it is I had all of these hidden pieces, layers that were literally preventing me from being who I wanted to be, causing me to chase the what's of the world. I had a high level of success. What house, what car, what amount of money? I chased it all. And by the time I was 27, I had all of it. Everything I'd sought out to accomplish. Again, not to impress. I'm impressing on the point. Because you know what it cost me? Who I was. So one of the other aha moments was waking up, realizing I'm running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, and I wasn't the only one that wasn't feeling joy, freedom, and fulfillment holistically. So I started to ask myself questions, wondering there had to be a better way.
Yeah. Let me share something with you, and I just want your reflection on it. Based on what you just told me, you were doing authenticity and vulnerability. You weren't being it from this tactical stance of, I can do this from a skill set perspective and I can do it, but I'm not being it. Can you, and it sounds like just by your response, that really is hitting you. So can you share?
Well, it hits me in every area of my life. My doing self far outweighed my being self for a long time. And it's something I'm still actively working on. Right. It's always been go into action, fix something, change it, refine it. Like my ability to be didn't exist without a significant amount of intention starting about 10 years ago. Now I'm in this process of taking it to a far further place. I've had a meditation and consciousness coach for the last 2.5 to 3 years. The higher I raise my level of consciousness, the more I allow wisdom to flow through me versus having to access knowledge. I've got trust, surrender, breathe on my arm as a reminder to consistently be. My stage shoes that you see back there, that's an extra pair, have be on the underside of the tongue because it's a reminder to be where my feet are. And the more I can be, the more I am, right? But the reality of it is I used to just do. And when I would do, it would create interference that connected me from being exactly who I was. In fact, I was doing the things that allowed me to be who the world told me who to be. So yes, doing versus being is a big dynamic. And it's actually one of the things I work with a lot of the individuals I coach is really allowing things to just be and recognize that we create so many narratives around things that are unnecessary. right? We literally create narratives. There's the things that happen in and around us, and then we put labels and narratives and stories around it, often of which aren't true. But if we can be long enough to pause, take a breath, and really ask ourselves the right questions, we can start to see the world more clearly and move faster with less effort without having to do more, by just allowing ourselves to be.
God, you're really hitting on something that has come up for us a lot over the years, and that is the story that we tell ourselves, right? And I'm going to refer to dads, listeners of the show, men in our mastermind, the men and the stories that we create. I'll share a quick example with you, and I want to hear your reflection. I'm going to actually share a couple. One is personal. I just individually me. Because of the way I grew up, my mom was married 3 times. My mom struggles with alcoholism terribly. On top of that, there were several toxic father figures constantly in and out. It was a revolving door for years of constant toxic father figures. My original biological father left. I met him again when I was 12. It was short, 6 months. Met him again when I was 30. And I've known him now for 17 years. He's been a part of my life. We've got a good relationship. And there was a narrative in there for so long of like, I've never seen a successful marriage. I've never seen a successful father. Therefore, I will not have a successful marriage. I will not be a successful father. I have no chance. That was my story in my 20s. All right. And even somewhat into my 30s. Now, that is obviously flipped a switch because of this platform and because I get to speak to amazing people like yourself all the time and learn these lessons, right? And you're right. I want to go back to one other statement that you said really quickly because I want the audience to really hear this. And that is, we can shorten our learning curve through the stories of others, right? And that's one of the beautiful things about being a podcast host and hearing beautiful stories like yours is like I can, and the audience can take something from your story and be like, wait a second, time out. Let me shorten my learning curve and go do this, right? So there's that. My switch has flipped over the years. I see men all the time in our community, and I'll reference our larger community, which is called the Dad Edge. We have almost 20,000 men who are in that community, and we see a lot of men asking questions and posts. And we had a guy. One of the stories. This, and I'll tell you one more, and I want your reflections. One guy said, "I work 50 to 70 hours a week as a construction foreman, and I don't have a lot of help, and I work these long hours, and when I come home, I am completely maxed. I'm short with my wife. I'm impatient with my kids. How do you guys do it? How do you guys flip the switch? Because I just can't do it. And it's because I work so much." And I challenged this guy on the comments and I said, last time I looked, number one, have you thought about scaling this business to where somebody could help you for the 20 hours that you're maxing out on, right? That you could get back. And the trades are really suffering right now. Jobs, people are looking to hire. They're starving for good employees. No one says you have to work here. It's hard staying where you're at, my friend. But I would also argue it's hard. It's hard making the change, but it's hard staying where you're at. You have to choose which is going to be your heart, right? And I was very blunt with the guy. One other example, and then here's where I want your feedback. I got an email from a guy who literally just joined our mastermind. And this email was very, very touching, but it could have been literally the same email that I wrote. He said, "Hey, I just applied to be a part of Dad Edge Alliance Mastermind. I have a call set up with someone on your team. I can't wait for it." He's like, "But I honestly feel that there's no hope for me. I came from this past where my dad was toxic and abusive. My mom was toxic and abusive. I tend to do the exact same thing with my family. I can't get out of my past. I am my past. And I just really feel that there's no hope for me." And it's these narratives and these stories that you're talking about. Now, I gave you an example of 3. And here's a man, right, who has a story, right, that you could easily lean on the other direction. And to be quite honest, people would give you a pass for it. They would forgive you, right? Totally. But you're like, no. This is not happening. What advice would you have for that story narrative?
I could probably answer that question for about 4 hours minimum.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm trying to think about which direction I want to take this because I think there are a couple of really critical pieces that I want to hit on here.
Yeah.
So often we allow the patterns of our past to make us believe that we are stuck. And part of that's because we've not had great examples. Part of that's because we've not had the ability to actually understand how to learn and grow as individuals. Part of that's the world narratives, right? The world tells us not to feel. It tells us to shut off pain. It tells us to shove it down, show up with a smile on, right? It says if you've got a gap in your life, go replace it with a strategy and a tactic. Go get a better sales training. Go get a different job. Go external. Everything in this world is about an external solution. Everything, right? Like all of the solutions that are it's external. But very few people actually go inside to recognize that every single thing that happens in us in our life, consider us a core of you. As life goes on, we develop these layers of pain on the underside. And for every layer of pain, we start developing this layer of armor that further separates us from who we want to be and who we want to impact in the life that we want to live. We're not taught to think. We're not taught to feel. We know that the 1940s field book for the Army had over 100 references to the human experience, emotions, vulnerability, authenticity, trauma. How are we responding to this? Today's, zero. Situational leadership, tactical leadership, right? Organizational leadership, field leadership. It doesn't talk about people as people anymore. It talks about people as machines and soldiers. So if we are not even having this process and ability to do this, then we don't know how to think and we don't know how to feel. We certainly don't know how to close that 18-inch gap between our head and our heart to allow ourselves to tap into the narratives that we actually need to be paying attention to. You see, so often for men, we feel something and we shut off the pain. We go immediately to our heads and we create a narrative around it. Whether it's real or not, by the way, whether it's real or not. And often they're not right. They're not real. They are a patterned belief system based on our emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. So what keeps people stuck is not the wrong strategy and tactics. They're critically important for leveraging and scaling our lives. The one guy you just talked about, he could leverage and scale his role through people, through systems, through strategy, and through tactics. He can't make himself feel with strategy and tactics. The stuff that keeps us stuck is the stuff that's inside. It's the things between our heads, between our hearts, and our inability to see them correctly. So we talk about this thinking, feeling quadrant, where we want people to not only think about their thinking, think about their feeling, feel their thinking and feel their feeling so that they can understand where they're at. Because I can tell you, for someone who had a good mindset, a good mental toughness, it's only half the equation. Critically important, but it's half the equation. What we have to pay attention to is that we are highly dynamic beings that feel. We have to first understand, and the world's highest performers do this. Some of the individuals that I coach, right? You need to know, are you hardwired mentally or emotionally first? Then you need to be able to tap into both narratives and be able to balance and regulate between the two because they both lie to you. But at the end of the day, you need to deal with your shit if you want to change your path, right? I can almost guarantee you that the work habit is a combination of protection, avoidance, armor, and this belief system that working hard is the only way to provide for his family. I can guarantee you that there are dynamics of emotional triggers that are likely tied to shame, might be connected to his self-worth, that are limiting his ability to believe that he can be anything other than that foreman at that organization and do something differently. It takes healing. We have to allow ourselves to feel so that we can heal, right? So often people limit what they're doing in their businesses because they don't see how to move forward. They don't understand that they are literally the ones in their lives that are giving them either the fuel or are creating the brakes for where they want to go. And so my advice for folks is, if you don't know how to do this, by the way, I'm one of the best in the world at doing this, is holding up a mirror for people to see the patterns of their past so they can extract the lessons of their life so they can understand how to move forward. But we go through this inside out methodology to help people actually understand what are the primary emotions that have impacted you. You got to raise your level of awareness to it first. I dealt with shame at a deep, deep level, right? And shame manifested in my life in many different ways. But until I could become aware that it was even there, I couldn't be intentional about it. Our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware about 40. No wonder we feel like victims, like life is fate, like we have no influence or control over our destinies. Because until we go through a systematic process of moving the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, we are going to feel like stuck. We're going to feel like life is fate. So when we become aware of it, we can then become intentional with it. Shame had an impact in my life, right? My wife would ask me, hey, what are we going to do with the kids this weekend? And my shame filter would hear it this way. Hey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? Not what she asked, but that's what my shame filter caused me to hear. So what did I do? My shame, to defend myself, because being a husband and father is my number one role that I care about, would puff up my chest. All of a sudden, I'd get bigger energy, and I'd rattle off the 10 things I'd done in the last 4 days to show her what I'd done to be a good husband and father. That wasn't even what she was asking. She just wanted to know what we were going to do with the kids, right? How often were those little things happening where I was creating damage? So owning that is also recognizing that where I've created damage as a result of these emotional triggers in my life, with my wife, with my kids, with people in my life, I've got to actually create repair. And when I can start to own those things, then I go to the unrooting process. Have you ever picked weeds in your life, my friend?
Just yesterday.
How was that process for you?
It sucks. I don't like it.
Do they ever get stuck in the ground? Do you ever have to get one out of the concrete? How does that work for you?
I had to like move the rock around to make sure I was getting these bad boys by the root. You know, don't get me wrong. Here's the cool thing. Like even my kids asked me this. They're like, "Why do you like doing yard work?" I was like, "There's something very therapeutic about doing something that's mindless because then I can like literally tap into more creative thought. Like when I do that stuff, but I can also step away from something knowing that I made it more beautiful. That's why I like doing it. However, moving the rocks around in the landscaping, pulling those weeds out and stuff like that, I'm like, you know, like I don't really.
But how often do people have weeds in their lawn? They're like, well, it's green, I'll just mow over it, right? Or it's like in the driveway, so they just crop it off as best they can. But again, if you don't get the root out, the weed continues to grow. Right. Unless you get all the way down to the bottom of the root, the weed will continue to grow. They are so resilient and ridiculous, right? Our emotions are no different. Yet the world tells us to shut them off, shove them down, don't pay attention to them. Until we get to the root source of our emotions, we cannot free ourselves from them because we will not allow ourselves to heal through the damage that has been created in our lives and around our lives. We have to unroot, because if we get to the root, the source, then we can start to pull it out. And just like you did, now you've got an empty hole you get to fill with new dirt, new thoughts, new patterns, new behaviors, new narratives. The last step is move. We got to understand how these emotions move through our body, how they move through our world, and how do we move through them. I told you one shame example. That's one way shame moved through my body. But I also was in the corporate space for a long time, working with multiple billion-dollar organizations. And guess what? I would show up. I talk fast. I'm loud. Do you know how many times I would have somebody lean over and be like, "Shh, Brian, you can't talk like that in a business meeting. You can't do that." And I would shrink down in myself, feeling like who I was wasn't good enough. I'd bite my tongue. I'd shrink. Literally shame, same emotion manifested completely different. Shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. And I have to understand how they move so I can start to understand how it moves in my world, meaning where do I get triggered by it? I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of. So I've got this list of triggers over here. I've got how it moves in my body over here. Now I need to start matching them and pairing them so that I can, in those moments, pause, take a breath, and ask myself, am what I'm dealing with right in front of me actually real with what's in front of me? Or is it how my dad looked at me when I was 4? Is it how my grandpa looked at me when I loaded the dishwasher incorrectly when I was 7? Right? Is it the fact that I had toxic men in my life that never gave me an example? And so my belief system not only is faltered, but I also don't understand how to give and receive love. I don't understand how to model being a good, effective husband and father that can be the protector and the connector in my family. Right? And so until we actually recognize that wherever you are in your life, if you're stuck, if you're not where you want to be, you aren't living with joy, freedom, fulfillment, and connection at the deepest level, I got to be really clear. There is not an outside solution. It's only inside. It will be the most difficult journey you will go on, but it will pay the greatest effects and have the largest compound effect in your life, in your relationships, in your business. Literally, we've removed shame from people and they've 5x'd their company in 18 months. Like there are so many situations where just removing that emotion allowed people to deeply connect in their lives in a way that they wouldn't otherwise. And so what you're doing for these men is giving them a safe container to be able to come in, share from the collective wisdom of these other men who maybe have moved through similar situations. And you're allowing them to understand that they can hold a mirror up to themselves without judgment. Because here's the thing, our triggers, most of this shit isn't our fault. It's generationally passed down and we inherit it. But it does become your responsibility once you become aware of the damage that it's starting to create in and around you. And once it becomes your responsibility, you're in a position where you can actually change the patterns of your past to live the life you want moving forward.
I have a question. Freaking love you, man. I have I do, man. I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask it, and I want you to gel on it for a second, and then I'm going to just share something here really quickly. Number one is, why do human beings hold on to that story of why they can't so hard? And it's almost like what we do is we look for proof. Like as we even move forward through our life, we look for proof. Like, oh yeah, see, this is why I can't have a successful marriage. See, this is why I can't be a more patient father. This is why I can't be fit. This is why I can't be wealthy. See, it's there. Yet it's the, and we hold on to it like we're protecting it, but we know deep down it does not serve us like at all. This is what I see is probably one of the biggest roadblocks for men that come and do life with us in our mastermind, or men that never do life with us. And I see them on social media, or just interactions that I see with friends I haven't seen in a long time. It's these reasons of, and they hold on to that like for dear freaking life, man. Like it blows my mind. But I agree with you. I and while you gel on that particular question of why we do that, it is the hardest thing in the world when someone holds that mirror up to you. But it's almost like that. It's a beautiful moment because we know exactly where we're at. And it becomes this defining moment of like, I know where I'm at. I know why I'm here and no more. And I don't know what the future looks like, but it ain't going to be this anymore. And that it's one of the most beautiful and freeing things. And what I've noticed is with clients over the years, or men in general, that's the hardest point for them to get to. And you and I being on the other side of it, sometimes depending on the client or depending on the person or depending on the friend or the relative or the brother or whoever it is, you want it more than they do. Like, it's like, dude, it's beautiful over here. Get out of your own way. So what's the answer to that, Brian?
Well, what you just said, I want to restate in a different way because it was beautiful, but the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until you accept the current state of things, you cannot alter them, you cannot grow, you cannot move, but that's what we all want to do, right? Think about it. We're born as our brightest, most authentic burning light will ever be. And then from the time we're little and growing, our parents, teachers, employers, and coaches start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. You should be this, you shouldn't do that. You should want this, you shouldn't want that. You should have this amount of money, you shouldn't have that amount of money. We literally start getting layered from the time we can remember in all these shoulds. And should, first of all, is a shame-based word because it implies whoever you are, whatever you're doing isn't good enough. So a lot of these narratives are actually conditioned into us because of the outside world, which is why we're also conditioned to look outside for it because so many of them came from the outside. But here's the thing. You actually said something that was also part of the answer. They're protecting it. Let's look at the human experience. It's rooted in 4 areas as I believe it. I think we all seek and desire 4 things. We all seek and desire to feel safe. We all seek and desire to feel protected. We all seek and desire to feel seen and understood. And we all seek and desire to feel connected. By the way, these last 2 are the ones we desire the most, but they don't happen unless the first 2 do. So when I walk into an environment, if I don't feel safe, what's my tendency? To protect myself. Right? So often we don't feel safe because we don't know somebody. We might be the only one in the room. We're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of like how we're going to feel, all these things. So what do? We protect ourselves. Our armor goes up immediately. By the way, once that armor goes up, you immediately guarantee you won't get what you want because you're actually projecting it away from you. Imagine you're living in this cylinder, this little invisible force field that's called armor. You're protecting yourself. How are you ever going to connect with the people on the outside of that armor? How are you going to authentically demonstrate who you are, vulnerably and open through armor? And how are they ever supposed to receive you so that they can see you and understand you and actually connect with you when you're guarded and protected and you're defensive, right? So when someone holds a mirror up to you, you have to drop that armor if you actually want to accept the state of things because you have to hear it from a place that's not defensive. But here's what happens. Armor does 3 things. It not only prevents you from being seen and understood and connected to the deepest level, but brother man, if I give you 2 5-pound dumbbells and told you to hold them out in front of you, how long could you hold it there?
8 to 12 hours. No, I'm kidding.
I would pay to see that, actually. If you could hold those for 8 to 12 hours, that'd be awesome. But
I have no idea, but it definitely would be.
Within a minute, you're probably feeling it in your shoulders, right?
Yeah.
And then the longer you carry it, there's more burning. And by the way, the longer you hold that weight there, the heavier it gets. Our armor is no different. We're holding armor out, trying to protect ourselves, thinking it's what's keeping us safe, but it's preventing us from being seen and understood. It's preventing us from connecting, and it's incrementally crushing us the longer we carry it. The third thing armor does is it's this invisible force field. And there's 2 types of people. There's loosey-goosey, and there's highly controlled perfectionists. I fit into that second category. Because control, I could absolutely make sure that the world could see what I wanted them to see. So the loosey-goosey type, right? The world tells us to shove stuff down. So just like a trash can, every pain, every experience, every emotion, we just start to shove down so that we can show up with a smile on, right? Move fast in the world like they all want us to. Well, if you have an open container at the top, guess what? At some point, you can only cram so much, it starts spilling over the top and literally falling into different parts of your life, ruining your relationships, ruining your business, ruining your life because you haven't dealt with and processed the shit that you've been shoving down for 40 years, right? Then those of us who are really tightly controlled, we've got a lid on our container because we're not going to let any of that shit spill out. And we're going to make sure that that lid is tight and that we're good to go. But guess what? The more shit we shove down there, the bigger the pressure builds up till at some point it's like a bomb and that container explodes, literally sending shrapnel and damage throughout our worlds. That was me. I almost lost everything I wanted with my wife and kids because I was the container and I would blow. And so the reality of it is that armor does those 3 things. And so when we're in a position where people are actually operating this and they say, well, I can't. Yes, it is a defense mechanism based on the narratives that they've absorbed from the world that they've allowed and chosen to keep in their existence. But it's also been their inability to actually heal and feel through this. And guess what? True strength actually hides behind vulnerability. When I say I'm the protector and connector, as leaders in business, as leaders in families, what do we need to do? We need to drop our own armor so that we can wrap a layer of armor and protection around whatever environment we're in to ensure that everyone is safe, everyone's protected, everyone's seen and understood, and everyone's connected. We have the ability to create environments like that so that people can truly be who they are and connect at the deepest levels. But it's up to us as the men, leaders in our families, leaders in our businesses to do that. And oh, by the way, I didn't mean to leave out the women, but this is the Dad Edge Alliance. So I spoke to men, right? But the reality of it is men and women both have the ability to be the protectors and the connectors in their lives, their families, and their businesses, which ensures that everybody gets what they want.
I love that, man. God bless. Brian, I wish you didn't have a hard stop. I could talk to you for the next 4 to 6 hours. And I would hold
maybe we just need to do it. Maybe we just need to do version 2, bro.
I'm thinking we should. Well, let's do this. Since you have a hard stop, I want to honor your time. We've talked about a lot, which, by the way, thank you for doing so. We've gone pretty far down the rabbit hole as it pertains to our marriage. So 2 areas: pertains to our marriage, pertains to raising kids and leading kids. What is the best advice you could give us based on if we could just encapsulate and put a bow on everything?
Have a soft front and a strong back.
I
got that statement from our good friend George. What that means is give them a soft place to land, have an open heart, have an open front, no armor, no protection. Be the one that your family can lean on, show them empathy and compassion, show them vulnerability, but be the strong back so that you've got the spine to ensure that you can guide them on the path that's necessary, that you can give them the strength they need when they need to borrow it, that you can give them the love, the compassion, the connection, and also be the protector and the connector for your family. So if there's one piece, I want you all to just have a soft front and a strong back, because if we can all do that as men, we also approach each other, meeting each other where we are. We have more empathy and compassion in the way that we operate, and we live with vulnerability and authenticity flowing through us. But too often, we don't have a soft front. We have a strong front. We've got armor. We've got protection. We even have our chest plates that we puff out because that's what we do as men, right? That's not what it's about. True strength actually hides behind vulnerability.
I don't know why, and it will hit me after we're done here. Almost 1,000 episodes I've recorded, and I think I've gotten misty-eyed 5 times. This is one of them. I don't know what it was, Brian, about you saying that, but it was the picture that it created in my mind about a man that maybe wasn't a part of my life, and maybe the man that I want to be for my kids and my wife, because so often in the past, I have been guilty of like, well, if I need to show strength, I've never even put it this way. I need to have that strong front, which is actually the opposite, which is
because your armor is actually pushing everybody else away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, my God, Brian, if anybody got anything from this show, it's that it's being able, because men are, I think what we do is we confuse strength and resilience with pushing people away. Like, oh, if I'm strong, people can't get close to me. I'm strong, I got to be stoic. If I'm strong, I can't show feelings. If I'm strong, I'm this or that. And you're right. What that really does is like, well, I can't really relate to my dad like that. My dad can be strong, right? He can be a badass, but I also can't relate to him if he's a robot. Like,
right.
And he's nothing but stoic, right? Constantly. Yeah. I think there's a time and a place for that. But I think operating in that, if men can take that away, having that soft front and strong back, dude, that is gold.
And on our next episode, I'll break down the knife versus the string so that we can all understand how to tie everything together in our lives, because it's important.
God bless. Brian, you're an amazing individual. I loved you from the first moment that I heard you speak, and the first moment I got to shake your hand. And actually, I don't think we shook hands. I think we actually hugged. And
we did hug.
I love you even more now. I want to make sure that the men who want to connect with you, whether it's follow you on social media, I know you do a lot of different things on social media. And if they want to connect with you and personally, what's the best way to do that?
At Bogert Brian on any social media channel. Obviously our website, brianbogert.com, is a good one. We also have a lot of different places where we are creating men containers for them to actually heal and have the ability to learn these tools, to be able to apply them in their lives, not from a strategic and tactical perspective, but from an embodied inward perspective so that they can become free. So I'd love to chat with anybody. I never realized when I got into the coaching space that I'd probably be battling toxic masculinity more so than I even realized. Right. But that's truly something that the softer I've been able to get the men around us in terms of their hearts and their open fronts, the more magic just flows into their world because they're actually able to receive it.
I love it, man. God, you're an amazing individual, and I will take you up on round 2. So
Dude, let's do it. Let's just
to,
not wait another 18 months to do it. Let's do it sooner than later.
Let's get it scheduled. Gentlemen, for all the show notes, head on over to thedadedge.com/390 for this show if you want to connect with Brian. Again, thedadedge.com/390 for this show. Brian, thank you so much, man. This was gold.
Thank you, brother.
You bet, man. Gentlemen, go out, have a soft front, a strong back, and live legendary. Take care.